So I think, again, it's like addressing your podcast listeners, right? If you're listening to us on the podcast, let us know in the show notes, or like, hey, if you're still listening to this, or if you're catching this on a replay or whatever it is, like, so you acknowledge that audience, like you acknowledge that you have listeners on this platform and you still want to hear from them and ask them to do something. Could you shoot me an email or write a little review? Because that would so help, right? It's like, if you found this helpful, listeners, do this. Or take a picture of yourself listening to this podcast. I would love to see you do that, right? So how can you also get your listeners to take some action? Or did you find this funny? Like, there are some podcasts I listen to when I'm traveling and commuting, and I just burst out laughing, and then everyone looks at me. It's like, what is she listening to? Right? Those are the sort of things that you could ask, like, did this make you laugh? Did this make you giggle? Are you listening to this while you're doing the dishes? Let me know, right? And then call them out. I love to hear what you think. So, give your listeners something to do as well, so they can have a chance to interact with you, even if it's after the fact.
Welcome to the Communication Queens podcast for the visionary leaders, speakers, service providers, and podcasters who are looking to stand out sharing their story. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, former screenwriter turned master communications coach. On this podcast, I'll be coaching you on how to share your own transformation story so that you increase your visibility, influence, and income on podcast interviews. Let's get your voice heard.
Fern, how do we not suck at presentations? How do we not suck at our communication? Like, let's just hit it on the head.
That is such a good question. And first, the reason I say how to not suck at something is it really does jar people, right? Some people may not have the courage to admit that they suck at something, but some people go, oh my God, yes, I really need help with that. And it's really also to like, get the right people into my world, right? If you're not afraid to be a little bit offended by some of the language I use, then you know what? Let me work with you. Because sometimes the honest truth that can be a bit brutal, maybe what you need to hear. And then with some loving guidance, I'm going to show you how to not suck. Because it's really just a matter of making a connection with your audience. And we forget that. We are in this zone. And I believe this, right? People who get up, who want to share information, it takes a lot of courage to actually even get up and speak in public. I'm sure many of us who, dread speaking in public. I'm a shameless ham, so that doesn't apply to me. However, for those who want to share their genius, right, it takes so much courage. So you do it out of service, right? Why would you get up there otherwise if you didn't want this knowledge to help somebody else? So let's make sure this message counts, but make sure that it is something that you can connect with the person. It's not all about your 20 years of knowledge. And I say this because I come from the world of higher education. And, we have a lot of brilliant people, but they just love to pour 20 years of knowledge and research into these, very long slide decks, and everybody's falling asleep because they, use it like a teleprompter. And it's like, oh, you've lost your audience. Right. So I think it's like, how do we honor the time of your audience? How do we make sure that if I was sitting in the audience, I would want to lean in to learn more about what you have to say, not after 1 minute going, oh gosh, escape route, and then start planning my escape, daydreaming, looking at my phone, playing words with friends or whatever it is as a distraction. So I think that's also many ways, like I said, how do we not suck? And we don't realize it. And first of all, it's like, what do we want our audience experience to be? And how can I make that connection for them so they'll want to learn more? And at the end of the day, it's like, how do you want to make your audience feel about receiving such amazing knowledge that you're going to share on them? So that was a lot to a short question, but we could tease it out a little bit more.
Yeah. So I'd love to know the difference of communication styles from your perspective between a presentation, a podcast interview, TED Talk style, a keynote. What is the difference in how you communicate between them?
So a lot of it has to do with some formatting as well, right? So with a podcast, like you and I were speaking, it's like an interview style. I'm not putting up a slide deck. So it's a very different sort of free-flowing conversation. So that's a different style. That's more natural. And I think it's a lot easier in that sense, right? Where we're trying to speak to your audience. We know who your audience members are. We want to make sure that what we share with them at the end of it would serve them. So again, this is more conversational and fun. TED Talks have a very set format. They don't go over 20 minutes, 18 minutes at most, right? You're talking about one point, and then you're spitting out all the sort of things that you can speak to. You might have a slide deck, but it's a very different format. Chris Anderson wrote the book Talk Like TED. So that's a great resource for you to actually look at. I read his book. I actually used his book as part of the research for my book because I'm thinking about ways of how do we communicate, right? Using some of the TED principles when I do presentations. Now, primarily when I was doing presentations, it was because I was teaching, I was training adult learners. I was training a lot of law enforcement officers because what I was training them was in communication skills, especially when they encounter people in crisis. People have mental health issues. And I wanted to make sure that they could use their communication skills first as a tool before they have to grab their weapon. So there's this mantra that we used to say, like, talk down before the takedown. That is such an important skill set to have. But I had to make sure that what I was training them stuck because if they could not implement the lessons I was teaching them, lives could possibly be at stake. So again, right, it's like with the intention, like you mentioned before, how can we make this something that is also digestible that I can actually take in, right, and then actually use in my daily life? And you have to make sure that it connects with them on some level. It can't be too out there or academic in a sense, unless of course you're talking to other academics. It comes about knowing your audience, but all those sort of things would differ in how you are actually delivering this message of yours, your training or whatever, in what style, right? So if you're training, it's going to be a different thing. If you're doing a webinar, again, you're just giving information and you may not have the option to have as much interaction versus other formats. And what else did you mention?
Like keynote.
Okay.
Yeah. And traditional academic slideshow presentation. Because you painted such a beautiful picture in the beginning of like sitting in that classroom and there's that, academic and they've done all their research and you're like,
I know, 20 bullet points later
of all the things, you're like, I guess I'll remember one. And I think looking at, people who are professional speakers, like I think Tony Robbins is one of the greatest communicators, like him or don't like him, like he emotionalizes the words that he uses. So how do we, in all of the styles, emotionalize and paint the picture of those emotions?
See, you hit the nail right on the head, right? Yes. You have to make that connection with emotions. And it's, if you remember what Maya Angelou said, what she said was, and I'm paraphrasing, people don't remember what you said, but they remember how you make them feel. Right. So you have to sort of think, well, how can I generate some sort of visceral feeling and reaction to the things that I say? And the best way I do this is also using another very proven technique, and it's storytelling, because we're painting a picture, right? Words plus images and feelings will give you that long-term. Because again, how many people remember, they always say like, oh, I can picture the face, but I can't remember the name. But they never say like, great name, but I don't remember the face, because images, count for a lot of it. So when you think about narrating a story, and when you say those words like, imagine this, again, you've already trained the brain to imagine, to think about something else, right? So people who hear that immediately put themselves in the story. And they're most likely putting themselves in the lead character. Nobody plays the victim, nobody plays the villain. They want to see like, I'm in this story. How am I going to conquer this obstacle? How am I going to get to my destination? How am I, as Luke Skywalker, going to defeat Darth Vader and save the galaxy, right? Right. So it's like you're painting this picture of how we could get there. And then you're going to, forecast like, well, now what happens if Luke Skywalker doesn't succeed? What happens if he absolutely fails in his mission and he doesn't destroy the Death Star? Oh my God. What would happen if Darth Vader won? Right. And then you can just imagine like, oh no, we're going to be living in a different world altogether. But you know what? I have a solution to make sure that you, as Luke Skywalker, can win the day. Do you want to know how? Now everybody was like, yes, I want to know. They're leaning in. So again, storytelling. And I just use Star Wars because I'm a big Star Wars nerd. I have a lot of references to Star Wars in my book. In fact, I use the C-3PO formula. I have the Jedi order of things. So, things that are easy for people to remember if you're a Star Wars fan. If you're not, it's okay.
You and my husband would really get along on that in the Star Wars love. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds to me, are you familiar with StoryBrand?
Absolutely. I'm a fan of Donald. I'm a student of Donald Miller. I got to meet him in Tennessee. So I'm really quite, yes, story brand. Always
Yes.
that you are the guide, like showing the way, be the Yoda, right? So you can show your audience members who are your heroes. They're going to be your Luke Skywalker to make sure that they can defend, the universe.
Yeah. And that's why when I'm working with clients, in how they're communicating on their podcast, like I always want to make sure that I just had a conversation today with one of our clients, and I said, you don't necessarily need to paint the picture of all the trauma that you experienced, because your audience isn't going to want to put themselves completely in the picture, like, especially if it's trauma. But if you're sharing a story of like domestic violence or something that happened in your past, being able to mention that it happened and then guiding people into like, the story of the lesson of how to, into the lesson of what you learned, and to the empowerment. People want to feel that even if they're in that place, they don't want to really feel that space of being in the suck, unless you're watching some Academy Award nominated movie, which most of the ones getting nominated these days are just incredibly depressing. But that they want to be the hero, and it being able to find that hero's journey and pitching that hero's journey is so. I've seen such a difference between the pitches that we receive as a podcaster for our Crown Yourself podcast, and the pitches that we deliver for our clients, when people lead with that hero's journey story. Yeah. When it's like, okay, they went from, stuck on the planet to saving the galaxy. And that's the journey that people are interested in.
Absolutely. And that's it, right? It's like people like journeys because it's transformation at the end. I mean, if you look at my book title, it's giving you a manual, like, how do you not do something, right? And then you're going to transform your skills from boring to badass. Who doesn't want that? I want to be a badass. Right? It's like people who go,
you already are, Fern, I can tell.
People who want to say, I want to be a badass will self-identify and go, yes, I may not be there yet, but I want to know how, right? So how can you paint that picture from that? And I say this not because, I became a badass because I used to suck. I learned the lessons because I did the death by PowerPoint. I locked up a lot of people with a lot of bullet points. I thought, oh gosh, there's going to be a better way to do this, right?
See, what you have to describe to me, paint me the picture of what is death by PowerPoint.
So death by PowerPoint is when you have a presenter who has a jam-packed slide and the fonts are super small and he starts to read every damn line. So it's like the slide deck becomes like a teleprompter, right? It becomes a real crutch. Mm-hmm. So rather than really using just as a visual aid, it becomes the whole presentation and they start to read from it. Or there's just so much information that the audience starts to read along and they're no longer listening to you. And you've lost your audience at that point. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, don't misunderstand me. I love PowerPoint. I think it's a great tool, but I would never use it, as some people have misused it, to put everything up there, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I'll just put on a slide. And then, more like, oh, I'll need that to remind me of what to say. And then it becomes like everything they say. And then it's like, you know what? If you want your audience to read along with you, give them a handout, right? They came to listen to you and what you had to say. You are the subject matter expert, not the slides. Right. So it's one of those things that people forget and they start to use it as like a crutch to then, give them that false sense of security. I mean, some people don't need a slide, which is great. If you can speak and memorize what you have to say and be able to guide your audience, wonderful. I like to use some visual cues just so I can draw my audience in. Right. And sometimes I use other things like, oh, there's a video, or I'm going to get them to listen to something. So I pique their interest. You know what? I'm going to play an audio clip and I want you to really listen. And I'm going to quiz you on right? And they're going to go, oh, what is this, thing I have to listen out for? So there are many things that I use a presentation slide deck for. And, some of those other things are like multimedia content, but also like, how do I pop something up that gives them something to look at and go, oh, wow, what is that? Right.
Yeah. So you've successfully, you wrote the book, How to Not Suck at Presentation, and then you transformed that into a coaching program. And now you're appearing on podcasts, sharing some of this amazing information. How do you translate the presentation style into podcast format so that it connects and converts people into your world?
Well, first of all, you should always be authentic to yourself, right? Whatever you're sharing, people will buy into your message, again, because they know, like, and trust you. So if you're speaking from the heart, be authentic about it. But I also say, bring your passion. You are speaking on something that you probably know a lot about, right? That makes you,
hopefully,
yeah, right? So I go on stage, right? I'm like, oh gosh, don't put me up there if I don't know anything about this. So again, right, it's one of those things like, should everything fall apart, like, even if the technology fails and everything else doesn't work, you should still be able to speak from your place of knowledge and genius and share that with the world, right? Always sort of think, how can I get this message across to my audience so they can at least take one gem with them and then act upon it? So I don't think it matters so much in terms of whether I'm speaking on stage or if it's a webinar or whatever. The goal is like the listeners, the audience.
Mm-hmm.
How can I help you use this information in your life so you can get your word out? Because I really believe that what you have to say matters. Otherwise, these ideas would just be ideas, right? But if you want your idea to count, for it to like make a difference, because that's why people share their ideas. That's why people have the courage to get up there and share their knowledge. Now, even if you are doing this because it's your job, right? You have to present your quarterly numbers. That might seem the boring thing in the world. Who wants to know what these, KPIs mean? But guess what? There is an intended audience. Whoever needs to hear these numbers, it could be your higher administration, it could be your sales team. They have a vested interest in knowing what these numbers are so they can go, oh, we did really good. Let's do more of that. Or, oh dear, we are really, poor on sales. We need to like up certain things. So again, what you present, use it as a means to inform your audience so they can take action on that information. And that's the other thing that people sometimes forget. They give all this wonderful information and go, okay, that's it. Like, well, now what? What do you want me to do with this information? Right? Even if it's like, did you learn anything? Right? If you even tell your audience, post something on your social media platform and tell me the one thing you learned, or raise your hand if you learned, whatever it is. So you train your audience to engage with you. Way. Because once they start taking action and they see other people taking action, they'll want to participate, right? Because nobody wants to be left behind. FOMO, big thing, right? Even when you're doing webinars or if it's a virtual presentation, use the chat, use the functions that are there, use what the platform gives you to give you some form of engagement, right? Whenever you are giving any sort of information, I always like it to be a bit more of a two-way conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with you and I, we're conversing, we're talking, and hopefully your audience will get something from it. If they go, well, oh God, Fern talks to that. It's okay. But again, right? How do we have some back and forth? And how do you invite your audience in on the? So that's why it's being authentic to yourself, and not everybody has to be loud and gregarious and out there. I'm a bit like that, but some people don't identify with that. And if you're a more quiet soul, and if you are a nervous speaker, it's okay. It's okay to own that and go, you know what? Come right out and say, I'm a bit nervous when I start. And, I might fumble my words a little bit. And people out there who are nervous and shy, we're going to go, oh my God, I could so relate to that. And they're going to have a lot more sympathy and empathy because you know what? You're a brave person to get up there. And it's better for you that you're up there than me. So I think it's okay to own the nerves and be okay to be a shy person to speak.
Mm-hmm. And I think that on that point, on a coaching note, when you if you ask for permission to say, like, even in a coaching session where you're like, I'm going to say something that you're probably going to want to punch me in the face for. And you call something out and you know that there's a behavior or pattern that you need to call out. People will be more forgiving if you just like announce it and declare it, and then they'll actually be interested, and then you actually get their buy-in and their permission to be able to share the thing. So it actually provides you with more grace. I love that tip of being able to call it out initially, because it actually provides your audience with basically, in essence, getting your audience to give you even more permission to fumble, to mess up, because you're creating that relatability.
Absolutely. And I always say this when I have a lunch crowd or an after lunch crowd. Sometimes I don't get to pick the sessions I get. So it's like, oh, the after lunch is the toughest crowd I find because they're digesting. It's different if you're in person. You get to walk around the room a little. I'm like very mobile. I never stay behind the podium. And I get to like walk in the room. And if I see somebody nod off a little bit, I sort of like go by and go, oh, tap on the shoulders. Like, what do you think? So when they see motion, they can follow you. But, when you're doing a Zoom virtual presentation, perhaps, and it's right after lunch and everybody has a camera off, you don't know if they're sleeping behind the camera. And I always say, you know what? I understand that you're probably still digesting your lunch and, eyelids may be a little bit heavy, and it's okay. I'm going to try to make this as interesting and zappy as possible and to make it as interactive so, I don't lose your attention. Are you with me? Right?
Yeah.
Let me type yes in the chat. So just so I know you're still listening and you're still awake, right? And then you're like, oh, I better not be caught sleeping. Right? So just little things like that.
Yeah. And I really wish that, if you're listening to this on the podcast, please go over to our YouTube and watch this because Fern's body language is in and of itself engaging. She's leaning forward. There's a really beautiful big smile on her face. And you talk with such a gorgeous smile and you bring that light through your face. And you can hear it in the tonality of your voice. I'm sure if you're just listening to the podcast, you can hear it. But go over and watch this episode on YouTube and just watch the engagement that she naturally has. She's leaning in. Now, when it's a podcast scenario though, Fern, like we don't have a chat. We can have a call to action. We can have, hey, engage. But the engagement is really in the dialogue of our connection. And then it's from that it brings the audience along, especially if they're like longtime listeners of the podcaster and they're used to a certain level of engagement. If I'm checking out, then that means that they might be checking out. Yeah. But I'm not checked out. I'm fully engaged. We're like right here doing the thing. Like I'm so excited. So without those tools of having a slide deck or having a chat, what are some tools that we can leverage to engage on a deeper level in a podcast interview?
So I think, again, it's like addressing your podcast listeners, right? If you're listening to us on the podcast, let us know in the show notes, or like, hey, if you're still listening to this, or if you're catching this on a replay, or whatever it is, like, so you acknowledge that audience, like you acknowledge that you have listeners on this platform, and you still want to hear from them, and ask them to do something. Just shoot me an email or write a little review because that would so help, right? It's like if you found this helpful, listeners, do this. Or take a picture of yourself listening to this podcast. I would love to see you do that, right? So how can you also get your listeners to take some action? Or did you find this funny? Like, there are some podcasts I listen to when I'm traveling and commuting and I just burst out laughing and then everyone looks at me. It's like, what is she listening to? Right? Those are the sort of things that you could ask, like, did this make you laugh? Did this make you giggle? Are you listening to this while you're doing the dishes? Let me know, right? And then call them out. I love to hear what you think. So, give your listeners something to do as well so they can have a chance to interact with you, even if it's after the fact.
I love that idea of take a picture of yourself while listening to it, because so many people like, don't do it if you're driving, please. Like, oh yeah, pull over, stop the car, take your selfie, then get on your merry way. But that engagement, and also gives the faces. It gives the faces of the audience, because I think, especially for podcasters, you see the data of your downloads, you see the data of how many people are listening, and sometimes that faceless number and can be disheartening, because you're like, you're putting so much love and heart and effort, and then you're like, having coached multiple podcasters, you're like, oh, I've got 16 downloads. Oh, and I'm like, have you ever been in a room with 16 people? That's a small, intimate workshop. So you just provided workshop level content for them, but being able to connect with a face of your listeners, that's a phenomenal tip, to be able to request people to take a selfie listening to the podcast and share it.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, turn around, and then again, it invites them into the conversation too, right? And then it's like, hey, if you leave a review, I will shout out some of your reviews on air. That would help us so much. And just to say thank you, I'll read out your review on air, right? Yeah. Now you're saying, oh my God, she acknowledged me listening to her podcast. How awesome is that?
Yes, yes. And it's that level of engagement. I love it. So on Fern's advice, y'all, you're going to take a picture of yourself listening to this episode. Make sure to tag the at Communication Queens agency and Fern Chan so we know that it was this episode that you took your action on. Yes. And so I want to shift gears because you are an authorpreneur. You created a book. You created a coaching program from that book. And it was actually your book's publisher or
I self-published, actually.
Oh, self-published. It was the promotion for your book that actually reached out to us for you to be on the podcast. And I would love to know, what has been your success with podcast guesting? What have you noticed? What have you liked? What did you not like?
So I've been invited on an array of different podcasts, a lot of them also centered on helping other entrepreneurs. And so I was on the athlete entrepreneur. I'm like, oh, how interesting. You know, he was a former NBA player, I think, football player. Anyway, it's like, now he's taken all his sort of skills that he learned as an athlete into how that works out in entrepreneur. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It's like, well, you know, back in the day, I used to play rugby and I was a marathoner and all those sort of things. So, right, you sort of find all the things to talk about. How do you apply life lessons, you know, from what you've learned and in your sort of life experience to transfer into this? So, you know, and then I've got a law entrepreneur coming up. So it's interesting because all of these people in whatever different fields also could use the tips and tricks of how to be better presenters and be better communicators, right? So there's a common denominator, but I also find like, who is my host and how can I relate to them, their audience, and who they pitch to? So I can then say, hey, you know what? Because you are a lawyer and I actually do have a law degree. I went to law school. You know, I use some of that just to be a better writer. I haven't practiced law a day in my life, but my God, does it help you to have like clear, you know, write more succinctly and, you know, probably and sort of like
and persuasion and influence tech.
Yeah, at a very technical level. But again, you want death by PowerPoint? Listen to a law lecture. Be scarred from those days in law school, you know, but you don't even realize it because you just think like, this is how information is presented, until you sort of think, oh gosh, when the shoe's on the other foot and then you have to give boring information. It's like, everybody's going to fall asleep. I got to make this, you know, stick somehow. And I'm not going to teach law to these officers if they can't even sit through this first bit of the legislation, you know? So anyway, side note. But again, so the book helped me to sort of pull all the sort of information together. And I know that this can help so many different people, not just presenters, but sort of think about, if you're a leader, how do you present your information in a way that is clear and succinct, that, you know, you can bring your team along with you? Because that's the thing, right? You want to make sure that everybody's still with you at the end. They're buying into what you have to say. Because if you've lost your team member because everybody forgot what the damn mission is because it was so long and convoluted, well then, you know, nobody will know what they have to do. So, you know, so that hits on different levels. And also, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a coach, you have to speak to an audience about your services. Like, how can you help them solve that problem? How is it that you can help them transform their life in a way, doing it with your method or whatever? Make sure that you can, you know, relay that information so it speaks to their pain. So they know they can say, oh my God, you know, Kimberly has the solution for me as a life coach. And I want to learn from her because she touched on all these things. She really understands me. But if you make it more about yourself, when you make yourself the hero rather than a guide, then you're going to be like, oh, people are going to go, well, I don't want to know about their hero story. Help me. Right. So that's one of those things that, you know, you have to like make sure that you can get that message out. And how do you use those sort of skill sets?
So what have you noticed with the success of the book happening from going on podcasts? Because I know podcast listeners are learners. Yeah. So 3 out of 4 listen to learn something new. That's 75%. And we've worked with authors before who have seen a significant uptick in their book sales. I know my mentor, Brennan Bouchard, shares how Tony Robbins, because their books came out at the same time, The Motivation Manifesto and Money Master the Game. And Tony was just a beast. He went on 600 podcasts, and the sales on his book stayed for like 8 weeks longer, like on the New York Times bestseller list, because of just the continuation of just consistency of going on podcasts. So what have you noticed for your book sales as an author?
So definitely more, an uptick in sales because you're introducing yourself to a new audience, right? And now it's so easy. Like it's so much easy for somebody to get my book that's as a Kindle. It's $2.99. If you have Kindle publisher, it's free, right? But you can get the paperback. So you have multiple means of also growing your revenue more than one stream. So they can get the Audible, right? They can get the paperback or they can get the ebook. That's 3 streams already that you can constantly get revenue from. Or if you want to sell directly from your website, that's also a possibility. But I can't be bothered doing all the shipping and stuff. So it's okay. So, how do you then use that as a book? I use the book like a business card. For me, this is just introducing people to who I am, but also gives me the authority because you know what? I've published a book and I'm very blessed that it got to Amazon bestseller status, right? It's like, oh, this is great. People wanted to know more about this. It's also easy to digest. It's not a tome. It's not an encyclopedia. It's got beautiful pictures in there. It's in color. People can see, go, oh, I get what she's trying to say, right? It's easy on the eyes. It's digestible information. So again, right, you sort of think about how now do I use this as a business card? So the next time people ask you, oh, Fern, what do you do? It's like, oh, well, I'm an author and educator and a speaker, and I wrote this book so-and-so. You can get it on Amazon. Would you like to have a copy? Right? They become really good calling cards. They're great as Christmas gifts. If you want people love to have physical, tangible things. Like to be able to show somebody they have something to own, right? It's like published. It's beautiful. It's tangible. People like to hold tangible things. And if you can solve a tangible problem with your tangible product, it's a winner right there.
Oh, yeah. And I think the key piece, I love how you framed it, that you use your book as your business card. And that's the calling card that is like, here's the lead magnet that it's a no-brainer. And especially since you demonstrate your authority as you're going on podcasts, sharing what your book is about, practicing what you preach. You mentioned you've been targeting a lot of entrepreneur podcasts. Who's your book for?
So my book is for, I know it seems so broad to say like anybody has a gift of presentation, but I would say it's for business professionals, consultants, entrepreneurs, coaches. If you have a message to get out there that you want to make sure it resonates and sticks with your audience. So that's why I think also coaches this is a good book for coaches, educators, because I come from that world, right? Conference speakers. But again, business leaders, professionals, if you need to make sure you have to get a clear and succinct message out, right? How do you make sure that your presentation is so dynamic that you don't lose your audience and that it sticks? So you have to make sure that you have to deliver a message at the other end, and you want to make sure that you can get a reaction from your audience, but also make sure you have an engaged audience. That's the key thing, like an engaged audience. So they're not falling asleep or it just goes in one ear and out the other. Again, right? It's all about also what do you want that human experience to be? What do you want your audience to experience? Because I definitely don't want to be wasting your time if you're going to fall asleep, right? And then I put in all this time and effort to put this amazing presentation and you're not listening, because I would feel like that would suck. That would really I as a speaker would feel so deflated and dejected. And it's like, oh my God, I don't want everyone to do this again, because that just really sucked, right? I put in all this time and effort and nobody really heard me. Whereas if you had somebody at the end and go, oh my God, that was amazing. I really learned so much from you. How can I know more? Where can I get more of your thing? That I think is like what you do. And how does it open up opportunities for you, right? When you land your message and people want to learn more, right? They're going to come up to you and say, I want to know how you can do this at my company, right? Let's have a conversation. So the possibility of those future opportunities, but not only that, creating fans. Like I'm so touched every time I speak. Sometimes people go, oh, I don't care what you talk about, I just show up because I really enjoy when you speak. So that is like validation to the point where it's like, oh, I know I'm a good speaker. Because, again, when somebody says, I don't care what you speak about, I just see you on your docket, I'm going to show up because I know I'm going to get something from it. So that's, I think, the highest form of compliment. Right? You're going to create raving fans, right? You're not just building your authority and connection and getting your groupies, but you could have potential opportunities that come from landing a very successful presentation. Look, you might even get a promotion because your upper management's going to say, wow, Fern was so good at delivering. We're going to make sure that she's the one who speaks at events. We're going to take her on sales calls. She's going to be talking to joint venture capitalists, whatever that may be, because she can deliver that succinct message that's going to make people open up their wallets to buy, right? So,
yeah, I think, and the ability to present, the ability to speak in general, to communicate. I mean, one of our clients just got booked to speak at Google and Microsoft because she was going on podcasts, because she was sharing her story, because she was using her voice. And so I'm curious, looking at your, because our agency operates from a space of, we have a 3-tiered strategy that's successfully leveraged over 200K for our coaching business, that is from guest podcasting alone. And it sounds to me like you're hitting a lot of the entrepreneur, the business professional side of podcasts. But I'm curious, because one of the third part of our strategy is we hit the story and those interesting pieces of your story. And now you've delivered a keynote at the United Nations in Vienna. Like, you've helped over 200 people level up their presentation skills. You've published a best-selling book. So and who is the person behind the book? Like, what are those juicy pieces of stories that actually could provide you with a whole blue ocean of a new audience that maybe needs your book, but they don't know they need your book because they're not listening to the business professional podcasts?
So there probably one thing that people know about me, and it's probably because I'm such a shameless ham. It's like, I used to be a burlesque performer, right? And so, I'm no stranger to getting on stage, being under the bright lights, and then, starting to shed all my layers of clothing. So using all my assets to get an audience to really enjoy the performance. So I guess a part of it is I'm a shameless ham, but not everybody has that in them to get on stage and start peeling off layers of clothing. But I'll tell you what, though, when I was active in the burlesque community, there were a lot of shy women who did that. And I liken it to the same way as shy people or introverts who have to get up and speak. I say, put on a persona. Right? Mm-hmm. If you have to then say, you know what, I am now, Spicy L'Amour. That was my stage name. Spicy L'Amour. And I am this persona, even louder and flamboyant than I am now. Can you imagine? Right? So, how does this character that also give you a bit of a layer of, that would allow you to be braver and bolder, but your personality will still shine, right? There's going to be some things about you that innately will come to the forefront, and that's that whatever that goddess is in you, that star that is just innately in you, that's just waiting to come out. And that's what I think sometimes nerves are too. Nerves are just all your special juju just waiting to get out into this world.
What got you into burlesque?
Oh, I think I just signed up for a Groupon for a class, and it's we're putting on a show. I'm like, oh, perfect. I love to put on a show. Again, it's one of those things. How do you know you can do something? Is to sign up and do it, right? That's how I signed up to run a marathon and triathlon and Spartan races and all those things. Well, you know what? I'm just going to sign up and do it. See if I can do it. So
what did burlesque? Because my sister did burlesque and I did pole dancing. Just as a pole dancer. Yeah, it's just so much fun. And the burlesque, though I never performed outside of for my husband, but that space of what did burlesque teach you about the physiology of presentation?
I think it gives you a lot of confidence, right? Again, it's also managing the nerves, but also when you're putting on a performance and a presentation is just the same way, right? You need to rehearse. You are not going to go out there cold, right? You need to rehearse, practice until you have it down pat. Do things fall apart sometimes? Yes. Do some things don't come off at the right? Yes. But you know how to manage those sort of wardrobe malfunctions or technical malfunctions, whatever they may be, because you've rehearsed, you've practiced, and you can fall to your highest level of preparation. But if you just go up there and think, I'm just going to wing it.
Ooh, I like
never wing it. Even
highest level. You fall to your highest level of preparation. That is golden. That is just a goal. Is that in your book?
No, but I do have a mantra, proper preparation prevents poor performance.
Yes.
The 5 Ps. That's a lot to say. I've trained my kids to say that too. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. I'm like, thank you, darling. So it's again, prepare, right? So never go in cold. So always rehearse. So this way it's like, you're not going to go out there and go, oh my God, it's the first time. Like, do it a few times, do it in front of an audience, talk to yourself, record yourself, make sure you have an understanding of how you sound, how you look, because we never know. We always think we know, right? Until we see us and go, oh my God, I don't realize I did that. So it's always very eye-opening. And then you hear the things that catches you out. I used to be an ummer and an R. I still am sometimes. And I say right a lot at the end of my sentences. It's just one of those things, but you're trying to get your audience to go right. And so to go either say, yeah, I don't
get agreement. Yeah.
Right. So again, those are the sort of things. It's like, what are you aware of in your verbal cues that you probably don't think about until you hear yourself?
Yeah. I think it's so fascinating because the burlesque piece, the mompreneur piece, like those would be a targeted audience. And especially since you can communicate, like we were before we started recording, about how to leverage the power of presentation, communication, and negotiation
with your children.
I mean, you were working with cops and hostage negotiators, but kids.
Oh, that is true. That is true. How do you make so much of this a part of your life? And, I bring my kids into my business, right? I try to make them a part of my business because, I'm a mompreneur. That's who I am. And how do I use this message and make sure that my children can also see me as a successful person, as a business person? It's like, they go, Mom, it's like, that means, honey, you should prepare, you should practice, you should, do what you have to before you go on stage. So you're not just, winging it. So I think for them to sort of also see how you can model the behavior, because they cannot be what they cannot see.
And
like
kids listen. Yeah.
Lessons for our children.
Yeah. The lessons, and they don't listen to what we say. They listen to what
not all the time. All the time. But I think in terms of also the burlesque, I say this, like, I went on stage. Oh God, I feel like I was 10 months pregnant. I was 6 months pregnant with my child, my first one. And I went on stage and I suckered my husband to come on stage with me. I'm like, you know what? We're going to perform this. It's going to be like a love song to our first child. And so like, I bless his heart. I love my husband. So he went along with the first one. He wasn't along with the second one because it was a group number. And I was playing a very pregnant Rizzo for our burlesque Grease performance. And like, I gave birth like 4 weeks after that show, and people were like, oh my God, Fern, I hope your water doesn't break. But I went out there anyway, belly huge, and still like did it. So again, it's one of those things where when you have enough confidence to go out there, but also standing in your truth. I love performing. Back then, I was like, I love performing. This is a part of me. I'm not going to hide from that. So those are the sort of things that I use also, like that also help me gauge audience, right? When you're on stage and you are the solo artist and you have to you need to see how the audience is responding. Right? How do I make sure that I am, getting them to respond to the performance that I'm giving? And same thing when you're presenting, right? How do I gauge the audience to make sure they're still listening to me?
Yeah. I think that, there's a lot of, having coached leaders for now 8 years, there's a lot of fear around certain aspects of their story deteriorating from their quote unquote professionalism and from and yet here you are, having done burlesque while pregnant, having given a keynote at the United Nations at Vienna, an author, a speaker. Did you have any sort of like integration challenges with like integrating all these different aspects of your story into who you are? Or are you just so confident that in all of the aligned pieces, it just aligns, it's just who you are?
Well, I was mindful about some things, right? I think you're also targeting a very different audience. And again, I had a nom de plume. I had a stage name. I wasn't going up there as Fern Chan. I was like, okay, I had a stage name. So this way, it's like you have some separation. But did I invite all my colleagues to my shows because I wanted sales of tickets? Absolutely. Again, shameless hand, but that was me. I mean, there are some people who are not comfortable with that, and it's okay. Know who you can ask so that they can also celebrate you as a person, right? And then I think how many people again would say like, oh my God, I would never imagine doing that myself, but I would love to support you. So again, a good chunk of my, before even I married my husband, I asked him to come along to a show along with some other guy I was dating. I just hope they don't all sit at the same table. But it's one of those things where it's like, hey, this is who I am. And if you can't handle that, then it's okay. You're not for me. Right. So that's more on the personal side. But my husband is like, now he's like always on the front row or behind the scenes, because he knows that this is who I am. And he loves that. He celebrates that. He doesn't hog the limelight. And he gets to say, that's my hot wife up there on stage. And I get to go home with her at night. So that's who he is. And I think when I'm in a professional sense, I mean, I don't talk about that on stage, but it's like, wow, Fern, when she speaks, she's going to make sure that, she can hold the attention of people, and what she has to say has pith and substance, and it's going to be important enough that, people will actually pay attention. So again, it's like very targeted, but also making sure that it's succinct enough that, you're not telling a big backstory before people get to the point. It's like, oh my God, I've forgotten what she said already. But no, you have like the sort of somewhat hard-hitting facts to make sure people can listen, because what you said just like got their attention up front and say, hey, this is the problem we are facing right now. How are we going to reduce this with the limited resources and to make sure we can still hit this target, blah, 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 whatever that may be, right? It's always one of those things like, the pain of what we're all going through as administrators or whatever it is back in the day when I was in higher education. Like, how are we going to do all these things with the limited resources that we have, with the constant budget cuts, under threat that our programs will close, and still serve our adult learners in a way that will help them, improve their lot in life, right? That's always one of those things where it's like, okay, right? And when you can deliver something that says, I have an idea and I have a solution, people are going to want to listen.
Yeah, I would be so interested at how you would leverage going on a podcast that is a burlesque podcast to talk about the presentation skills. Because I have a feeling that there, a lot of women go into burlesque where they want to increase their confidence in other areas of their life. And finding how a skill set can be transferable is something that you've mastered. Like, you've done it. You wrote the book on it, like of how to not suck at presentations. And so being able to be that testimony in a way at this transference of skill sets, of the performance skill set into the presentation skill set. Yeah. That would be an interesting niche to just attack with podcasts, to explore and see what the ROI is from that for your book.
Well, what's interesting too is like people who, the women who do burlesque, they all have day jobs too, Mm-hmm. It's like, what is it that's in their day job now that they can then sort of think like, well, the skills and the things that I learned as a burlesque dancer, how can I transfer that sense of confidence, right? That sort of feeling of validation and just adoration when people because I can tell you what it feels like when at the end of performance, people are like, oh my God, that was amazing. They're cheering for you. And it's the same sort of kudos that you get at the end when you land a really great presentation and people are smiling, they're asking questions, they're coming up after, coming to you after the presentation, asking more questions. That's like the sort of same feeling, that same high that you get because you made an impact.
Mm-hmm.
It's that impression that you left.
And that being able to hold that lasting impression that sticks so that they actually have something to do.
Right. Because if you did something that was kind of like, meh, and nobody remembers meh, but they'll remember, wow. Right. Because again, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, listen, I'm itty bitty titty club. I'm like A club, A plus. I got really not much to jiggle and show, but you know what? I'm still going to make it like fun and engaging for the audience to enjoy. Right. So I think it doesn't matter. I think it's a lot of it comes through on your confidence and how you portray yourself, but also how do we engage with the audience, right? How do we get them to come along with you on this dance, on this journey, that you are expressing yourself in?
Oh, I love it. And I think I want the audience to really hear how masterful you are with your communication. Because I hear you go from like your personal examples, itty bitty titty club, to being able to move into the point and the lesson that you want to leverage from owning the vulnerabilities, weaknesses, mistakes, just acceptance of like who you are and right? Because we are our own harshest critics as well.
right? I mean, forget the fact that, hey, we are incredible creators of life, right? And so, yeah, bits have shifted since the kids and, we're not what we used to be. But guess what? I created life. And that's something to be celebrated. And this is the body I have now. Listen, I'm still working on those things myself, right? It's always a work in progress, but it's like, gosh, then there's still some bits that are hanging around and, yeah. So it's again, we're all works in progress. How do we iterate to get better each time? And just make sure that, look, we are all amazing. We're all on this journey ourselves. And, you just have to be kind of like slightly ahead of other people. You don't have to be sometimes the biggest expert in the world. But listen, I've had enough experience. I can show you my formula of success and what's happened for me. And I hope that, this worked for me and it, hopefully it'll work for you too. Why don't you try it out?
Fern, you've been absolutely extraordinary. And I always love to ask before we wrap, what did you love? What did you love about this conversation?
Oh my God, I just love how the synergy, right, of us being able to talk about how do we bring our strengths together? How do we serve our audience? That you are so conscious about making sure that you are giving value to your listeners. And I want to make sure that I can help you do that for them too. So I love that. This, how do we help each other? How do we help each other as women? How do we promote each other's strengths? Right. And making sure that our genius, whatever it is, can get out into the world and serve other people. Because there's always an audience who you will resonate with, right? Somebody's going to say, oh my God, Kimberly spoke to me, Fern spoke to me, whoever that you've had on the show, spoke to me. And so all those sort of things, you don't have to serve everybody because you're not for everybody. But the ones that you can and the ones that you can touch and make an impact, that's what matters.
Mm-hmm. Fern, how do we find you? How do we work with you? I know your book, How to Not Suck at Presentations, is available in all places.
Yes, you can get my book at Amazon. Really easy. Go to fernchan.com. I have resources there. If you want to take a quiz and find out where you are on the suck meter as a presenter, you can take that. It's fun. Lots of Star Wars references too. Let's see whether you are Death Star or Rock Star, right? So let's see where you land on the gauge. Yeah, you can also find me on Instagram at Fern Chan Presents. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me, Fern Chan, and also on Facebook at Fern Chan Author.
Phenomenal, Fern. As always, Communication Queens, let your voice be heard because your story has the power to save one life and probably more. Till next time.
Thank you so much for listening. If you love this episode, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. For more tips on guest podcasting, storytelling, and communication strategies, follow us on social media at Communication Queens Agency and visit us at communicationqueens.com. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And in the meantime, remember, your story has the power to save one life. Let your story and your voice be heard.